From medieval ballads to Hollywood blockbusters, Robin Hood has remained a symbol of hope and rebellion. But beneath the green hood lies a tale of desperation, brutality, and the struggle for justice. We think Robin Hood is a charming rogue, stealing from the rich to give to the poor. But what if the real Robin Hood wasn't the hero we've been told all along? What if his story is far darker, rooted by a world of oppression and corruption? Today, we're traveling back in time to reveal the dark truth behind the Robin Hood legend. Let's start with a quick refresher of the story. Set in medieval England, during a time of widespread poverty and oppression under the feudal system, the kingdom is ruled by the corrupt and tyrannical Prince John, who has usurped the throne while his noble brother, King Richard the Lionheart, is away fighting in the Crusades. Prince John, alongside his enforcer, the Sheriff of Nottingham, imposes crushing taxes on the people, enriching the aristocracy while leaving the poor to suffer. Robin of Locksley, also known as Robin Hood, is a nobleman who becomes an outlaw after standing up to Prince John's unjust rule. He retreats to Sherwood Forest, where he gathers a band of loyal followers known as the Merry Men. Among them, Friar Tuck stands out, a loyal companion who serves as both comic relief and a moral anchor. Robin Hood and his merry men live as outlaws in Sherwood Forest, where they ambush the rich traveling through the woods, taking their gold and redistributing it to the poor. Their motto, steal from the rich, give to the poor. The Sheriff of Nottingham relentlessly pursues Robin Hood to stop his defiance. Robin Hood repeatedly outsmarts the sheriff, whether by disguising himself, setting elaborate traps, or winning archery contests. He exposes the injustice of Prince John's taxes and inspires the common people to resist tyranny. Maid Marian, often portrayed as a noblewoman of grace and strength, is more than just Robin Hood's love interest. She also stands by his side in the fight against oppression. The story typically builds to a confrontation between Robin Hood and the Sheriff of Nottingham, culminating in a victory for Robin and his men. The sheriff is humiliated or defeated outright. The story often concludes with the return of King Richard the Lionheart, who restores order to the kingdom. Robin Hood's actions are vindicated, and he is pardoned for his crimes. In some versions, he retires to live a peaceful life with Maid Marian. To truly understand the legend of Robin Hood, we first need to step into the world of feudal England, a society that was as harsh as it was hierarchical. This was an era defined by crushing taxes, oppressive laws, and a rigid social order that left little room for freedom or justice. It's no wonder that tales of a rebellious outlaw who fought back against tyranny resonated so deeply with the people of the time. At its core was the feudal system, a structure where land was power and the majority of the population were serfs. These were the people at the bottom, whose oppression fueled the wealth and influence of the lord's knights and ultimately the monarchy. This wasn't just a way of life, it was a system designed to keep the rich richer and the poor in their place. Serfs were the backbone of the feudal system, working tirelessly from dusk till dawn. But the fruits of their labor weren't their own. They were required to give a portion of their crops, their time, and even their money to the lord of the manor. They couldn't leave the estate without permission, couldn't marry without approval, and couldn't dream of freedom without risking everything. Their lives were dictated by the whims of the Lord and enforced by the manorial courts, where even minor infractions could lead to fines or punishment. For some, the faint hope of buying their freedom or escaping to a town where they might live as freemen lingered like a distant mirage. But these opportunities were rare, and the risks were often deadly. If life as a serf wasn't hard enough, the burden of taxes made it unbearable. Kings and local lords imposed relentless demands to fund wars, fortresses, and their own lavish lifestyles. Serfs were taxed on nearly everything on their land, their livestock, and even their existence. And let's not forget the church. Serfs were required to give 10% of their earnings or produce as a tithe. This wasn't a suggestion, it was a mandate. Add to that the taxes imposed by monarchs for military campaigns like the 100 Years' War or grandiose castle projects, and you've got a population living on the edge of starvation. Failure to pay wasn't just a setback, it was devastating. Serfs could lose their meager possessions, their land, and even their freedom. Some were thrown into prison, others saw their entire villages punished for unpaid debts. And the worst part, this wasn't an anomaly, it was the norm. Robin Hood's story echoes throughout history, a system designed to keep the powerful in control, while ordinary people fight just to survive. Today, we face our own broken systems, whether it's financial struggles, societal pressures, or personal battles that feel impossible to overcome. Robin Hood didn't just steal from the rich. He defied the system that sought to keep him and his people powerless, giving them hope when they needed it most. At the center of this oppressive system were the sheriffs, figures tasked with collecting taxes and maintaining the king's law. The Sheriff of Nottingham wasn't just a villain in a story. He was the embodiment of this system. It's in this grim reality that the legend of Robin Hood was born, a tale of rebellion against a system designed to break the human spirit. If the sheriff represents local corruption, King John represents its source. Known as one of England's worst monarchs, John's reign was marked by heavy taxation, failed military campaigns, and constant conflict with his own barons. In 1215, the barons forced King John to agree to the Magna Carta. This historic document sought to limit the king's arbitrary taxation policies and curb the worst abuses of power. While it offered little immediate relief to the common people, it marked the beginning of a long battle for justice and accountability. So, where did the Robin Hood story come from? Was Robin Hood a real person? Or was he purely a creation of collective imagination? His story wasn't from one writer or one time period. It was born from England's oral tradition, passed down through ballads and songs. These early tales painted a very different picture of Robin Hood. He wasn't a polished hero. He was rough around the edges, violent, and even ruthless. In medieval England, being an outlaw didn't make you a hero. It made you a target. Outlaws typically lived in the forests, hunted by sheriffs. Outlaws usually stole to survive, not to make a statement. By the 13th and 14th centuries, Robin Hood, or variations like Robehod, had become a generic term in legal records for outlaws, much like John Doe is used today. Still, several historical figures have been proposed as possible inspirations for Robin Hood. Here are just a few. Hereward The Wake was a rebel leader who resisted Norman conquest, whose defiance and cunning might have inspired parts of the myth. Eustace the monk was a real outlaw and mercenary who roamed forests in northern France and England, leading a rebellious and criminal life. Despite his monastic beginnings, his life took a dramatic turn when he abandoned the monastery and became an outlaw. Robert of Wetherby was a fugitive described in records as an outlaw in the woods. In July 1225, King Henry III issued writs authorizing the Sheriff of Yorkshire to apprehend Robert of Wetherby, described as an outlaw and evildoer of our land. Robert was eventually captured and beheaded by the Sheriff of Yorkshire. Following his execution, a chain costing 2 shillings was purchased to display his body in public serving as a deterrent to others. During the Tudor era, Robin Hood's legend underwent a dramatic transformation. What had once been the story of an outlaw became a tale of loyalty, justice, and chivalry. This rebranding wasn't accidental. It was a calculated effort by the Tudors to reshape folklore into a tool for their political agenda. The Tudors, particularly Henry VII and Henry VIII, were eager to solidify their rule after the chaos of the Wars of the Roses. They understood the power of storytelling in shaping public opinion and are speculated to have co-opted the Robin Hood legend to promote virtues that aligned with their monarchy. The Tudors allegedly emphasized Robin Hood's allegiance to King Richard the Lionheart, portraying him as a loyal subject fighting corruption within local governance like the Sheriff of Nottingham, rather than rebelling against royal authority itself. This depiction cast Robin as a defender of the crown, aligning his story with the Tudors' goal of reinforcing centralized power. The outlaw's rough edges were smoothed to reflect Tudor ideals of fairness, honor, and noble action. Robin Hood evolved into a knightly figure, embodying the chivalric code and fighting for the common good. The tradition of May Day festivities played a significant role in this reimagining. These celebrations often included Robin Hood-themed events where he was portrayed as a merry hero, spreading joy and unity. This festive image further distanced him from his origins as a dangerous outlaw. Through this deliberate agenda, Robin Hood became not just a hero of the people, but also a tool of the crown. Maid Marian's origins can be traced back to the May Games festivities. Initially, Marian and Robin Hood existed in separate traditions, but over time, these lively festivals featuring plays and pageants began to merge their stories. By the 16th century, the connection between Robin Hood and Maid Marian had become more defined. This bond was further cemented in Anthony Munday's 1598 play, The Downfall of Robert, Earl of Huntingdon, where Marian is portrayed as Robin's wife. Originally introduced as Matilda Fitzwalter in the play, she adopts the name Maid Marian when she joins Robin in the Greenwood. Her association with May Day festivities and her growing presence in 16th century literature elevated her to an integral part of the Robin Hood legend. The earliest references to Robin Hood appear in medieval ballads. Songs from the 14th and 15th centuries paint a very different picture of the outlaw than the one we know today. These ballads were gritty snapshots of life on the run, filled with rebellion, survival, and bloodshed. In the ballad, Robin Hood and the monk Robin is portrayed as quick-tempered and violent, even attacking Little John after losing to him in an archery contest. The same ballad also shows Much the Miller's Son, a merry man casually executing a little page during the rescue of Robin Hood from prison. In a jest of Robin Hood, Robin does make a significant loan to an unfortunate knight, which he ultimately doesn't require to be repaid. Later in the same ballad, Robin states his intention to give money to the next traveler he meets on the road, provided they are poor. Robin Hood's influence even reaches the works of William Shakespeare. In the late 16th century, Shakespeare references Robin Hood in his play The Two Gentlemen of Verona. In the story, the character Valentine, banished from Milan, finds himself in the forest. There, he encounters a group of outlaws who, upon meeting him, wish to make him their leader. They exclaim by the bare scalp of Robin Hood's fat friar, "This fellow were a king for our wild faction." If you're familiar with the channel, you probably already know where this is going. The Victorian era breathed new life into medieval legends, and few figures were dramatically reshaped. The 19th century's reimagining of Robin Hood owes much to Sir Walter Scott, whose novel Ivanhoe played a pivotal role in defining the character for a modern audience. In Ivanhoe, Robin Hood, referred to as Locksley, was portrayed as a loyal, noble figure deeply tied to the ideals of justice and chivalry. Scott emphasized Robin's honor, bravery, and unwavering sense of justice, aligning him with the knightly virtues of Arthurian legend. Although still an outlaw, this Robin Hood was a righteous defier of corruption, embodying the best traits of a noble hero. It was this depiction that solidified Robin's place in the Victorian imagination. The Victorian era saw Robin Hood evolve into a defender of the poor and a symbol of hope for a more just society. The legend of Robin Hood became a way to explore themes of fairness and resistance to corruption. His acts of stealing from the rich and giving to the poor resonated with audiences confronting the hardships of industrial life. Victorian interpretations often emphasized Robin's relationship with Maid Marian, portraying her as a strong, virtuous companion. Their romance added emotional depth to the legend, making it more relatable and appealing to audiences of the time. Illustrators, including Howard Pyle in The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, portrayed his green attire as a hallmark of his character, laying the framework for the character we see today. Lavish illustrated editions of Robin Hood stories and theatrical adaptations brought the legend to life for Victorian audiences. These works showcased Sherwood Forest in lush detail and presented Robin as a heroic, larger-than-life figure. Victorian writers adapted Robin Hood's story for children, emphasizing his bravery, honor, and sense of justice. Through the lens of Victorian values, Robin Hood became a champion of the poor and a romantic hero. The Robin Hood we recognize today, the gallant outlaw in a green tunic and feathered cap, owes much to Errol Flynn's iconic portrayal in the 1938 film, The Adventures of Robin Hood. Flynn's dashing, heroic depiction cemented the character as a romanticized figure of rebellion, inspiring generations to view Robin Hood as a champion of the poor and a symbol of defiance against tyranny. Robin Hood's defiance of the law often seems noble, but the law itself was deeply unjust. Robin Hood's legend is rooted in one timeless idea: fairness. When the world seems unfair, we crave stories of justice. Robin Hood stealing from the rich to give to the poor wasn't just about gold. It was about restoring balance, even if only for a moment. Tales of Robin Hood often portray his conflicts with figures like the Sheriff of Nottingham as heroic, but they're not without controversy. Ambushes, deceptions, and even slayings feature prominently in his legend. While these actions are celebrated in the stories, they raise a critical question. Does the end justify the means? Robin Hood's enduring appeal may be less about who he was and more about what he represents. Each era has molded him to fit its own ideals, whether as a gritty rebel, a noble hero, or a symbol of justice. Can an outlaw truly be a hero? Or does Robin Hood represent the very chaos and opportunism he opposed? Robin Hood wasn't just a man, he was an idea. He was a symbol of rebellion in times of oppression, of community in times of isolation, and of hope when there was none. Robin Hood's journey wasn't just about the destination, it was about the people and ideals he fought for. At his core, Robin Hood shows us that even in the darkest times, there is always a chance for resistance, for justice, and most importantly, for hope. My question for you is, if Robin Hood existed today, who or what do you think he'd be fighting against? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the story of Robin Hood, then you're going to love exploring the origins of Disney classics like The Little Mermaid and Cinderella. These classic tales aren't what you think, so click here to discover the real stories behind the Disney magic. Until next time, stay mystical.